Yes, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me call to order this meeting, special meeting of the City of West Palm Beach Community Redevelopment Agency. I do see a number of new faces in the audience, so I'm going to read out our rules of civility and decorum, the rules that govern this meeting. Officials shall be recognized by the chair and shall not interrupt the speaker. Public comment shall be addressed to the City Commission as a whole and not to any individual on the dais or in the audience. Displays of anger, rudeness, ridicule, impatience, lack of respect, and personal attacks are strictly prohibited. Unauthorized remarks from the audience, stamping of feet, whistles, yells, and similar demonstrations should not be permitted. Please govern yourself accordingly, as offenders may be removed from the meeting. Also, any person desiring to address the CRA shall complete a comment card for each agenda item they want to address, and that card shall include the person's full name, address, and the numbered agenda item. If the card is not completely filled out, the person will not be recognized. All right, we'll go to comments from members of the dais. Commissioner Lambert.
No comments, Mayor.
Commissioner Verduzzi.
No comments, Mayor.
Commissioner Warren.
No comments.
And Commissioner Fox.
No comments, thank you.
And I don't have any comments at this time. We will now turn to the consent calendar. Items 4.1 through 4.4. Any comments, questions on consents? Item 4.1 through 4.4. Hearing none, I will entertain a motion.
Mayor, I move approval of consent calendar as presented.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Discussion. Hearing none. Motion. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, like sign. Hearing no opposition, motion carries unanimously. All right, let's now turn to item 5.1, update on the operations agreement negotiations, remaining construction and other asset information related to the Sunset Lounge project. Before we begin the presentation on this item, let me just say that I have, as the mayor of the city, as the head of the CRA, who has been black all my life, I want you to know that I am disturbed and disappointed, quite frankly, in the suggestion that this contract should be awarded to someone on the basis of the color of their skin. I know that perception is out there, that because of the Sunset and its historical significance to the black community, that the operator needs to be African American. Frankly, I find that insulting and disgusting. The only color that we as this body should be concerned about is green. We have a $20 million investment in the Sunset. As fiduciaries of taxpayers' money, it is essential that we pick an operator that's going to help us best protect our investment in the Sunset. I don't care, black, white, red, or purple. The primary consideration should be the effectiveness and professionalism and the ability of the operator to run the Sunset Lounge profitably and effectively. No one is entitled to this operating agreement because of the color of their skin. I hope I've made myself perfectly clear. Any suggestion to the contrary, I find to be ridiculous and insulting. Okay, Mr. Rugg, if you want to proceed with item 5.1.
Thank you, Mayor. Because I have been intimately involved in this, I've put together the presentation. So I would like to address the board from the dais, and there'll be a team with me, Anna Maria Ponte, and the consultant that's been helping us on this project, Dan Fenton from JLL, will also be helping me with the presentation, Mayor.
That's fine.
And also, I would be remiss if I didn't include Nancy Urchek, who has also been helping me, but Nancy has been great. She doesn't have a role, but she is here because she has been part of the negotiating team. So it has been a long time since the board has heard a status update on this project. And I do want to start with just sort of setting some expectations on how the discussions have gone over the last 8 months. And I am happy to report that the discussions have been of the utmost professional and cordial with every meeting that we've had. Going back to when we first had our initial discussion on August 11th, actually at the Sunset Lounge, we had the ability to meet with the VITA team and their team members, where we got familiar with the asset once again, and we're able to sort of start to get our hands around the nature of the project. And so today, of course, I'm going to go over an overview and just as a refresher for anybody that's watching at home, kind of talk about just where the Sunset Lounge is, what the original project entailed. Anna Maria Ponte will go over the construction, and the CRA has really broken this project into 2 teams. So there's a construction team, because there's a lot that's involved with the construction side of this project. We still have the FF&E to develop, and the kitchen build out, and a lot of other things. So I have asked Anna and project manager, our construction manager at the CRA, to really handle that work, which we'll talk about, and sort of what's happening with the remaining build out that has to occur. On the same parallel path has been the operations agreement negotiations. And that has been with VITA, and that was direction that was set from the board on June 27th. After we go through those 2 items, I'll lay, as best I can, a general timeline for the remaining of the project, some of which is not clear at this point, which is part of why we need direction from the board today. Summarize essentially where we're at, namely on the open items, what we have left to do, the direction that, frankly, the CRA needs in order to move forward. And then going into what those 2 options are on the direction in order to move forward with the Sunset Lounge. VITA will make a statement. That'll be about 15 minutes. And then at that point, happy to open it up to questions, which I'm sure you will have several that you will want to ask of staff and or VITA. This is just kind of a really a fun image going back to what the original structure of the Sunset Lounge looked like. Originally, it was a gas station and greenhouse that ultimately was transformed into a venue. But that's a picture dating back to the early days of the historic Northwest. Just as a reference point, in case anybody watching at home isn't quite clear on where the Sunset Lounge is, so if you have the FEC tracks, it's just west of those railroad tracks, nestled just west of the CMEX area. The CMEX ready-made plant, which is a facility that supplies a lot of concrete to our region. Whoa, what happened? Ooh. Sorry about that. Sunset Lounge is located on 8th Street and just across the street from Heart and Soul Park. And it really is in the heart of the historic Northwest community. Come on now. So I had, I don't know where my comments are. So this original project, and in the description on here, I had it on my notes, but the Sunset Lounge was originally started as a way to pay homage to the humble beginnings of jazz and the African American community in the historic Northwest. And these are some photos that really are shared on the regular to really illustrate just how vibrant and important this venue was to the community back in its heyday. The image with the big band is, I believe that's Lionel Hampton and his band, and of course, playing for a packed audience. And just the overall importance of the performances that played there. And that is really at the heart of why we started this project from the get-go. It was really to have the Sunset Lounge bring back that vibrancy and that place where you can watch world-class music in the heart of the historic Northwest. One thing that I want to point out is the ongoing carrying costs. So currently, this is what the ongoing monthly costs and annual costs, if you extrapolate it out over a 12-month period, is currently costing the CRA. So many of these, once we got an operator, obviously would fall under the operations P&L, and it would be part of those operating costs. But currently, without an operator, just as it is, with the air conditioning that we have to keep running and all of the systems that we have to keep maintaining, the CRA is currently spending $25,000 a month to ensure that the facility remains as is in good working order, and that's just things that come with being an owner of an asset like this. And then on a yearly basis, it's a little over $300,000. So now to kind of talk a little bit about the construction, I want to introduce Anna Maria Ponte, who has been the part of the construction team, leading the construction team on sort of where we're at with the construction and what are the next steps. Anna.
My part will be very brief today. We have, as Mr. Rook mentioned, separated the team, so I'm working with Gina Baker on completing the finishes of the building. The certificate of completion for the building was issued March 21st last year, but the finishes are not done yet. So at the time, the certificate of completion, all basically the Life Safety and American Disabilities Act elements of the building are in place and it's ready, but we need to complete the finishes, fixtures, and equipments that are needed to really open the place. So they are intended to complete it to be with the operator, but we're moving ahead on finishing. Basically, it needs to be the kitchen equipment that needs to be installed. So all the service lines are in there, but no equipment has been installed. The ground floor bar and restaurant, it's also doesn't have any finishes, doesn't have floor, doesn't have lighting, any furniture in there. Rooftop bar is also need to be completed, and the pre-function areas are kind of basic. We still need to do the art that is going on the walls. And all these finishes were based on the community input that was received when we were going through the approval process. So we still need to do all that. The design team has been engaged, and this is because we need to update the drawings that were done originally. So we have Sung & Associates working on the documents to bid the general contractor, and we have B-Star updating all the details for the interior of the building. We are hoping to have the bid out on the street by June this year to have basically a contractor doing the finishes and also purchasing agent to procure all the loose items that go inside, like the tables, the banquettes, and all those elements. And a kitchen consultant has met with the bidder team and discussed the elements that go to the kitchen. We have, under the current budget, $2,049,000 to complete this, and we think this will be sufficient, but we will not know until the bid is out and we get responses from the companies that will be. These are the two pictures you see in the left hand is a picture of the restaurant on the ground floor, so it's just bare bones at this point and needs to have all the finishes in there.
So while the construction has been progressing and we've been working with Song & Associates and V-Star, running along the same line has been the negotiations with Vita on the operations of the Sunset Lounge. So going back to June 27th, 2022, that's the date that we had the selection of the operator for the Sunset Lounge. And if you recall, there were 2 applicants that went through that RFP process where we had a technical review committee, we had a community tasting event, and then ultimately the presentation of both parties to the board. And at that, and on June 27th, Vita was selected to move forward with negotiations for the Sunset Lounge. So going back to that original direction that the board had mentioned or had selected Vita, there were 2 main themes that came out of those comments from the board related to the negotiations of the Sunset Lounge and to ensure that we had built in with any operator that would have been selected. And to summarize, the 2 main themes were making sure that the financial capacity and understanding of the operations was sound and in place, and that there was strong tracking, monitoring, and oversight with whoever was going to be operating the lounge, and that both of those were going to be clearly articulated as well as outlined in the operations agreement, so that there was it could be clearly understood exactly what it was going to take to operate the Sunset Lounge in an event that we were going to do our best to minimize the needed funding to go into the Sunset Lounge on a regular basis. And the last item, which, it's, I wouldn't really call it a theme, it was just a statement that was clearly said by many of you, which was, under no circumstances are we selling the asset. So I am happy to report that there is no real estate transaction of any kind involved in the current operations agreement as it stands. So I want to talk a little bit about the negotiating timeline. I'm not intended to sort of give you all a play-by-play on every single negotiation meeting that has occurred since September, because that in and of itself would take quite a while. But I think it is sort of important to just sort of articulate for everybody, just so that everybody understands, whether at home in the crowd or on the dais, just how much work both Vita and the CRA have put into the negotiations at this point. The original outreach occurred on July 26th, and that of 2023. That was just where I sent a very simple email to the general manager, Darren Cummings, and sent along with them, a list of questions that just really to get an idea of, okay, we need a little bit more information based on your proposal, things like that. As I mentioned earlier, there was that site visit on August 11th with the entire team, and we all went through the building. And following that meeting, Vita sent questions to staff to say, hey, we need a little bit more information to really kind of understand some specific details of the asset and the expectations and things like that. And we had our first initial, if there was a kickoff meeting, it occurred on September 7th, and that's where there was a big virtual meeting of CRA staff and the Vita team, where we all started to sort of lay out schedules and different details and expectations and things like that. So from that time to date, we've met on average 2 to 3 times per week, and that totals about 60 meetings total. And some 47 of those, were able to actually, identify with calendars, but we know that there was a lot of other phone calls and efforts added on top of those scheduled meetings to really get the operations agreement completed. And the primary participants on the Vita side were Darren, Chef Woods, who's with us today, and Tony, who's also with us today. So all of us collectively really spent a lot of time, doing what we can to get this agreement across the finish line. So going back to when we originally kicked it off, myself, I tried to frame the discussion with the operator that, because it came up during the negotiations, really, what are the goals of this project? And what are we trying to achieve here? So understanding, that, we're paying homage to the humble beginnings of the Sunset Lounge, but also that we want to be fiduciary, fiscally responsible and good fiduciaries of public funds, but also, how this whole project was sort of shared with the community. It really is to bring the Sunset Lounge back to its original heyday, if you will, as the primary goal. The next, which is very closely behind that, is that we want this to be sustainable. It needs to be able to support itself. And then last is that we want this facility to be a benefit not only to the historic Northwest community, but also just a national attraction for the entire city, so that it's something that when people say, oh, you're going to West Palm Beach, got to check out the Sunset Lounge. It's amazing. So in order to achieve those goals in an operations agreement, it really requires 4 main buckets or 4 main components. A 5-year financial pro forma, measurements for success or those key performance indicators, a clear entertainment schedule and menu, and we did receive that. Capital, and then ultimately the capital expenditure schedule and budget. And that's just so that we know just how much it's going to take to open the Sunset Lounge. So there are open items on 3 out of the 4 areas that we need to draft or to complete the operations agreement at this time. So now I'm going to ask Dan to come up and kind of talk about those areas and those open items. Dan has been doing the lion's share of this negotiations, so he's just going to walk through each of them. And then we're also going to discuss why these are important to the operations agreement. Dan?
Great, thanks. Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, thanks for the opportunity. Dan Fenton with JLL, just 2 seconds here. I oversee the venues and tourism practice for JLL, which includes really looking at and being involved with venues actually globally as well as throughout the country. So we have a lot of experience in having the opportunity to work on both RFPs and on finalizing operating agreements like this. So happy to be here. I also, before I start, want to restate something that Chris mentioned, and that is the spirit of the 47 meetings that we had. The spirit was always collaborative. So this wasn't a situation where the parties were consistently disagreeing or consistently sort of at odds over issues. The spirit of the 47 plus meetings was really designed to support all of us ultimately coming here today with a completed operating agreement. And not only a completed operating agreement, but also with a exciting vision for the future. So if the commissioners all participated in those meetings, you would have seen that in terms of the interaction between JLL, the team here, and the main players, and Chris mentioned this, Darren, the chef, Tony, Daryl, all kind of main players. I mean, I think Chef and Darren were probably in virtually all those meetings as we went through this. So just want to make that comment as we go through this, right? That we're really, the spirit has always been, how do we collaborate? So Chris mentioned 4 different areas. These make up key exhibits in the agreement that are still, we're still essentially in a situation we're trying to figure out how to complete. The first one is the 5-year pro forma. So as part of the meetings piece, we met several times really related to the pro forma, related to projections. We worked through things like what is it going to take to ultimately become profitable, and what do we need to do, and how do we need to plan. And there was an agreement on a 5-year pro forma. So as of I think 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, maybe longer, there was agreement after a lot of constructive work on the pro forma. What we did not realize until very recently was that there was essentially a goal of VITA to actually exclude years 2 through 5 as an exhibit in the management agreement. We didn't know that until just recently. So that's the reason why that item is open, is we thought we had agreement as to this, and then there has been a change in direction there that is now still outstanding. And the question is, why is it important to have that as part of a management agreement? Because it gives the board the ability to see, what is the next 5 years look like? I know, Mr. Mayor, we've had conversations about profitability. You mentioned the color green. It gives everybody the ability to see how are we collectively going to operate the lounge in a way that ultimately will be financially sustainable. So the open item there is getting agreement on submitting all 5 years as part of a key exhibit in the agreement. So that's the item that Chris mentioned around the pro forma. The key performance indicators, so starting back in January, we began to work on what we call KPIs. The goal, and I'm going to take you through that so you can sort of see, right, Chris, we have a slide here to show you this, I think. Yeah, so this is a list here of the KPIs that we worked on together. So gross revenue, top line revenue is a KPI. Net income is a KPI. This area here called entertainment and events, essentially what that is the event mix. So it's the agreement of all parties on, based on the roadmap, what's going to be the mix of events between live entertainment, private events, even a la carte dining is sort of part of that, but what's going to be the mix? And we agreed on that KPI. Customer service, we've proposed to have a third party ultimately be retained to be able to monitor customer service, and we talked about certain thresholds with customer service that would sort of demonstrate that we were delivering great service. Local partnerships, that's the demonstration that as part of operating the lounge that we have reached out to key local players as part of how we operate. I know that VITA has been doing that throughout. Community benefit. So one of the things that is important, and I think it came up right from the beginning, is as much as profit and loss is important, let's make sure there's tangible activities that we are doing that relate to the community. So there's a KPI that ties to how do we measure that. Local suppliers, that was designed to say, let's make sure there's a certain percentage of our procurement that is going to, if you will, local vendors, local suppliers. Sustainability, this is an area that really any operation nowadays has a sustainability plan of some sort. So that's what's underneath that area. Sales activity speaks to the fact that one of the key components of success are private events. So it's the ability for us to attract private events to the Sunset Lounge. And if you think about that, that's going to take proactive selling. So we're going to need to be able to together work on how successful we are in terms of our sales activity, and that is what that KPI is designed to speak to. So as of 4 weeks ago or so, there was a conversation with the general manager after a lot of really healthy back and forth discussions about methodology, pieces related to the key performance indicators, and we thought there was agreement at that point on the KPIs. And there was one question that was fairly minor but important that was raised, and we were going to work through that. After we had assumed there was agreement, there was then further communication that is now very recent that said there actually were issues that there was not agreement in or that needed to be adjusted. So we haven't been able yet to address that, but really we felt through all the work that we did together that there was concurrence on the direction of the KPIs. So that is why that item still remains open. Capital expenditures was another item that Chris mentioned. When we met in January, we sat down and talked about what it was going to take to really look at all the sort of pre-opening, if you want to call it, all the equipment, all the needs that there are as part of, if you will, opening the business. And a lot of back and forth, a lot of good collaboration here related to what that was and how that was going to be completed. We just received the first edition of that just a few weeks ago. And that will require, which we'd all agreed to, that will require some back and forth between all of us to really finalize that list so that the board knows that that list fits within the agreed upon sort of pre-opening budget. Or if not, that Chris would come back and there may need to be a request, if need be, for more resources. So that's the reason why that item is still open. I'm going to turn this back to Chris for a second on this piece here. But really what I want to say is, again, through all of the 40-plus meetings, spirit was collaborative. The goal was to be here today with a signed agreement, ready to go, and really spend the time today talking about the vision for the future. But we're not there yet. And we need to figure out what we do at this point, right? We need to figure this out. I will say that, and we've had conversations together about this, that I think it's important to consider, how are we structured so that we can make sure that, depending on what the outcome is of today's conversation, that there is no question about how we're going to proceed from here, depending on the outcome of today's conversation. So Chris, I'm going to stop here and turn it back to you.
And just to also go back to this slide, and just to be clear, so the costs right now as they're being proposed, because we had a chance to look at the pre-opening budget, is all of the costs are essentially right now slated to be covered by the CRA. So that's, we've budgeted in totality, and there's a couple of different line items, approximately 1.5 million for the operations. And so with all of that, the current proposal is that VITA will contribute 50,000, but everything else is essentially funded by the CRA. On the other open items, and this is just something that I think is worth noting, that while the three that we had just gone over are the material, I mean, those are the big ones. We can't bring the operations agreement forward without those components. There are still some other items that are still outstanding that we also need addressed in the agreement between the CRA and VITA. One is that there still isn't the business entity. There has been a name proposed, but it has not been registered on Sunbiz currently. There are still I guess some questions on the parking plan, not really quite sure. Some of the comments around that has been proposed by VITA aren't really in the purview of the CRA. They include using lands that need to be rezoned, which isn't possible. We've spent quite a bit of time actually drafting the parking plan for them. But there still seems to be a sticking point there on the parking component. And then lastly, I do want to talk about this schedule for opening, because it's probably the question I get most every single day that I come to work, is when is the Sunset Lounge opening? We had we actually spent a lot of time on this item with the VITA team. I want to say back probably like late January, February, where we went specifically through dates. And if you've seen a copy of the agreement, you'll see dates in there that talk about a delivery date, I believe, of September, with a potential opening date in December. Those were really contemplated with the understanding that in the month of April, we would bring an operating agreement to you. So we had laid out a pretty specific Gantt chart on benchmarks that we had to meet in order to achieve those deadlines. And again, those were both on the operations side and the construction side, because eventually the two have to blend. So at this point, because the operations agreement isn't complete, and that is obviously a critical component of opening, those dates are going to have to be rescheduled. And that's another big part, I think, of the discussions that will need to continue with the current operations. And those are just images of the parking plan that we included as an exhibit. So on the construction timeline, just to be clear, the construction of the Sunset Lounge, we're expecting full construction to be completed in the fall of this year. That is going to continue regardless of what happens with the operations. We have, as I mentioned, Song & Associates, we have a very clear plan that was outlined and that we're working with V-Star Interiors on. And so that is moving full steam ahead. We have an itemized list of everything that needs to be included, as Anna had mentioned. So we feel really good on the construction side of this project. So please know that the construction is going to move regardless of what happens on the operations timeline. However, on the operations timeline, currently it's unknown, to be frank, and at this time, I mean, and it's being ambitious, I think it would be at least another 45 days. But from the time that we have an executed contract, I think we are going to need that 8-month period in order to get it up and running from the point of an executed contract. So just to kind of set expectations for everyone on when the Sunset Lounge could be open, that's why having an operations agreement is so critical to have it open. So in summary, we have open items on three major components. To go back to the reason why today's direction is so important is that we have items, I mentioned the carrying costs for the Sunset Lounge. We also have professional consulting that has been helping with this project. In addition to bringing forward the operations agreement, staff was also anticipating bringing forward an additional budget item to have JLL help with the asset management component and essentially work alongside Vita and the operator for the first 18 months. And that would be to cover that pre-opening needs, to sort of help in any way that is really needed, and then to sort of follow through that first 12 months and really understand what that KPI, to make sure that, if there are things happening with the KPIs, and just really to follow along to make sure that we manage this asset appropriately. So the consulting needs that we have essentially covered were anticipated to be about 7 months. So we have gone through the first 7 months of the contracting consulting with JLL. And then we added 3 months on top of it. And that was from January to March. And so we've been spending quite a bit of time. And so April was really supposed to be that point where we start with the asset management component. So we're now going to need additional consulting time with JLL to help walk through the remaining outstanding items in order to make sure we get this across the finish line. And then if we are successful, then the asset management there moving forward. JLL is approximately a little over $22,000 a month. So that is another cost that we do have on the project. So the direction today, and this doesn't come easily, but there's 2 tracks that staff needs direction from the board on. One is continued negotiations, and with the continued negotiations, we will need at a minimum an established deadline for when you all expect to have the operations agreement to you. And then from there, staff will build in the necessary funding in order to keep the consulting moving forward, as well as determining those pre-opening costs and if there's any additional dollars that need to be allocated to the project related to the pre-opening. And as I mentioned, the construction is going to move forward. or we can terminate negotiations. And it's really hard, but this is staff's recommendation. And it's primarily for 3 reasons. Well, 4 reasons. First is we've spent a generous amount of time on the negotiations to date. Second is a lot of the information that needs to go into the operations agreement we should have had by now. We spent a lot of time, we were very clear about what we needed. And then last is that we can't help but extrapolate that this is an indication of execution of operations for the Sunset Lounge. And that's really unfortunate. And then lastly, what I would say, the 4th point is that the board was very clear with the direction that was set on June 27th. And the operations agreement and the current form and direction it's heading, I think misses the mark on the financial ability and component of the operations. So now I'd like to turn it over to Vita for their 15 minutes to address the board, as we mentioned. So Tony, and I don't know if Mr. Haygood, oh, you're right in front of me. You're welcome to come up.
Thank you. Well, we weren't expecting that recommendation, I assure you. My name is Tony Brown. I was brought on by Vita to be its chief negotiator. I am not a lawyer. My career in banking started here in Palm Beach County, and it was an illustrious career. From Palm Beach County, I became the director of community development for the largest bank in the state of Florida. From there, I went on to manage our nation's investment fund in community development financial institutions, a multi-billion-dollar investment fund, and implemented the New Markets Tax Credit Program. And so my first stint in Palm Beach County is where I fell in love with this community, is where I fell in love with the Sunset. My second stint in Palm Beach County served as director of the Riviera Beach CRA, where I implemented the first phase of the marina development, and proud to let you know that I'm the co-developer of the second phase and looking forward to finishing it. My CRA responsibilities also included managing our nation's oldest city redevelopment agency, the City of St. Augustine. So when Darren and Vita asked if I would assist them in negotiating the operating agreement, I said, well, actually, I made a few phone calls because I knew that these had been tense negotiations. And I've known the mayor for nearly 40 years, and I'm very fond of him and the principals in Vita, and I felt that if there's a role I could play, I would welcome playing it, because I know what the Sunset means to this community. And so, as Mr. Fenton said, yes, the negotiations were quite collaborative, very professional. Mr. Fenton didn't mention that he's based in California. So when we would have a meeting and he was scheduled at 4 p.m., it was 7 p.m. my time. And so we had marathon sessions, and many times it went past midnight. And I can tell you that, yeah, when it came midnight, that my parking lot items became very small because my man wore me out. And but our team has a different perspective on where we are on the business terms, and I'd like to highlight that because our recommendation to you is to please direct staff to bring back the operating agreement. We are ready to go. You're going to hear shortly the outline of the operating agreement, which your staff did not present, to show that there are bells and whistles built in to do what Mr. Rugg said, to protect the interests of the city. And those items were negotiated in good faith between myself and Mr. Rugg and Mr. Fenton. And I think that as you hear these terms, if you so opt to move forward, you will be convinced that these terms are fair to both you and the operator. Let me start with the item that was first provided in detail, and that was the KPIs. I believe you have in your packet, Mr. Haygood asked that it would be sent to you, an email that we sent to your staff regarding the KPIs. We never disagreed on the KPIs. If you look at what your staff and consultant provided as an exhibit to that agreement, I don't think any one of you on this dais would sign that document. It was poorly written. The weights and measures did not equal 100%. And when you look at the individual KPIs, you could not understand what are we being measured on? What's the methodology? The agreement says that, and I say, so we agreed on a list of the areas to be measured. In the agreement, it says that each year KPIs will be negotiated and will be part of the document presented to you for approval each year. We believe that the year one KPIs should focus on the profitability measures and the events, and that the other measures will come later. So we never disagreed on the KPIs. It was what's important for us to ensure sustainability. And when you look at the agreement, once you get the agreement, you'll see that you have the option of approving the KPIs each year. And if we have a disagreement on the KPIs, then it calls for a dispute resolution that's also in the agreement. And so our failure on the KPIs can result into default. So please understand why we looked at those very carefully. We don't disagree on accountability. It was what your staff and your consultant proposed in a very messy document that they expected Vita to sign. And I think that that was unfair. The other thing I want to address, actually, I'm just going to go straight to it. And that's what the agreement has and what's been negotiated. If this was a presentation on the agreement, what Mr. Roog would tell you that we worked collaboratively to present an operating agreement that would allow you to execute. You have made a huge investment in the sunset, and we recognize that. In fact, we appreciate that investment. But for those of us who've been in this community for over 40 years and some even longer, we know that the sunset isn't just a building. It's not just a place to dance and be entertained. It's been a place where friendships have blossomed. It's been a place where deals have been cut. I'm telling you, as one of the former presidents of the Black Chamber, it's been a place where we met to make sure that this city, that this county, recognize the contributions that Black entrepreneurs play in terms of making our city and our county a better place to live. So the sunset, as your park has it named, is aptly worded. It's been the heart and soul of our community. It's not where we shuck and jive. It's been a place where we've come together to make sure that the lives and the people in this resident are taken care of, where our friendships can grow, and where the spirit of our community can live on. So your agreement, if your staff had presented the agreement, what you would hear that the agreement requires for you to approve an annual operating budget. There is no exhibit that requires us to present a 5-year pro forma. We presented the 5-year pro forma. We presented the 5-year pro forma to show that it will become profitable and sustainable in years 2 through 5. But the agreement doesn't require it to be provided as an exhibit. In our April 10th correspondence to your staff that I think also Mr. Haygood sent to you as a copy, you will see that a 5-year pro forma has been provided. So in our position, that item is complete. What we did request is let's focus on year one and let's focus on the initial operating budget to spend our time. I talked about the KPIs. If this was about the agreement, if you approve the agreement today, the agreement requires a delivery date. What that means is that there's a set of requirements that not only does Vita have to meet, because there are some requirements that your staff have not met, that the city have not met. And so there are requirements on both parties to meet those requirements by September 30th. If we meet those requirements by September 30th, we get the keys. In getting the keys, we then pledge to have it open by January 1. If we fail to meet the requirements of delivery on either side, you can terminate, we can terminate. That's what the agreement says because we are focused to get the sunset open. If you give us the keys and we meet the requirements for delivery, the current agreement says that we have another 90 days to get the facility open. Each month in May that we miss, that date slips. And so if the focus is on getting it open, as I said, I've known the mayor for 40 years. We're not standing before you because of our color. We're standing before you because we're capable, qualified, and I think that was recognized when your selection committee recommended Vita to be the awardee to operate the Sunset. The other thing in your agreement, supposed to be a 5-year agreement with an option for 5 years. Your staff and consultant have negotiated a review period in year 2. So in spite of all the other things that you get to approve, we also have to undergo a review in year 2 that gives you the right to terminate. So you have all the tools at your disposal to terminate this agreement for performance. And we have no issues, and if they brought the agreement to you today, I think we're ready to execute. The KPIs, as I said, the issue is which of the 9 should there be, and whichever ones they are, the methodology needs to be clear, it needs to be weighted so it can be rated. And that's our concern and has been our issue. So let me close. We have other folks here that will participate in the question and answers if you have some for us. Michael Hagan mentioned the attorney, Marvin Woods, our executive chef, Bruce Lewis, who's our management consultant, and then Daryl Bay, who's doing the entertainment. And before I close, I just want to read a part of an article that was in the Palm Beach Post that really, I thought, summarized where I thought we are, and what we need to do. And that article appeared on April 2nd, and it read, partly, rather than hosting famous entertainment acts and igniting the revitalization of the city's largely Black Northwest community, the empty Sunset stands, for now, at least, as a monument to government inertia, protracted legal battles, and some fear peak. And I thought that was a misspelling, peak, P-I-Q-U-E. And I had to look that word up because it didn't flow in that paragraph. Mr. Hagan, would you silence your phone, please? I did that for you, Mayor. It right went on my flow, man. Why are you gonna ring on my flow? So in that article, so peak, I had to look up peak. So peak means a feeling of irritation or resentment resulting from a slight, especially to one's pride. We hold no anger. We have negotiated in good faith. We are not frustrated, and I'm not before you today with any indignation. We are not piqued. And so what we ask you is to direct staff to bring the agreement back before you. All the things that I've outlined that protects you, you will see in the agreement. And if you see my email on April 11th, I ask you, would you sign off on those KPIs? Thanks, and our team is here to answer any questions. Mr. Hagan?
Yes. My name is Michael Haygood. I actually was the first CRA attorney for the city of West Palm Beach. The only thing I want to say is the way the negotiations have proceeded. As I stated in my letter to you, once we got the city's proposal operating agreement, we then responded. We never got a response. We were negotiating. We never got a response from the CRA as to our last version of operating agreement. The next thing we had was a letter from Mr. Rube saying, you haven't done this, you haven't done that. Well, you were negotiating. Respond to our points in the operating agreement and we can move forward. Some things we may have said, okay, fine, we'll agree with that if you agree to this. That's negotiations. That's not putting something down someone's throat. This is supposed to be a good faith negotiations. We responded to the city's proposal, or the CRA's proposal, within the time frame they asked, point by point. And I think if you really asked them, they honestly would say, a lot of the points that we raised, they agree to. But rather than getting a response to each of those points, again, we got Mr. Rook's letter, and that was it. The negotiations were over. So I don't think the city, as far as that's concerned, has negotiated in good faith. And that's all I really say. I don't think it's necessary for us to go point by point tonight, negotiating in the public here with the commissioners who don't have an understanding of the background of what we're talking about. Thank you very much.
So with that, Mayor, y'all hear me? So with that, that concludes the presentation. As I mentioned, on the CRA side, relative to the negotiations, it's been myself, Dan Fenton, and Nancy has been helping us with the drafting of the document. So we're happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. My initial question is, who is the entity that is going to be the party to the operating agreement? Because I thought we were awarded the RFP to somebody called Vita Lounge LLC.
Yes, as is commonly done with these entities, Vita will be the sole member of an LLC. What we haven't done, and the reason we didn't do it because we didn't have an agreement, was to go and actually file with the Secretary of State. We have offered to give to the CRA for review the operating agreement for the entity. The name, I think, is immaterial. It's the fact that Vita will be the sole member of the LLC.
Okay. Commissioners, members, any other questions, comments? Commissioner Lambert?
Thank you so much. Just a follow-up to that question, given that Vita will be the sole member, have you provided that operating agreement?
We offered to provide it to them when we sent them the last version of our comments to it. We never got a response to that.
Okay, do you mind, can you share with us who are the principals of Vita Lounge and
Yes.
the percentage
It
ownership?
would be Mr. Darren Cummings, and I don't know the second gentleman's name, but they were actually the two principals of Vita only. Those are the only two principals of Vita.
Okay. Follow-up, Mayor?
Yes.
I did pull the Sunbiz for Vita because I noticed there was a number of different entities listed in the documents, and it does list Kenneth Young. Is that who you're
Yeah,
talking about?
I think it was the second person.
Okay. And what percentage ownership does he have, and has he been involved in these negotiations?
No, it's been principally Mr. Cummings.
And what's his percentage ownership?
If I'm not mistaken, I think it's 50-50.
That's my understanding too.
Thank you.
And between Vita and his partners, I think they own and operate about 6 other restaurant entities, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, ma'am. Hello, Commissioner.
Commissioner Warren.
Thank you very much, Mayor. And I recognize the mayor's opening comments at the beginning of this meeting and stating how very important it is that we understand the tremendous investment that the city has made in this project. That I too agree that this is probably one of the largest projects that the city has invested in as an entity, and that it deserves the best operation, and that we should do all things in good faith in order to ensure that it is a successful endeavor for the city, for the CRA, for the community, et al. I believe that it is important that we recognize that this is a great opportunity to have a destination in our historic Northwest, something that has not happened before. And just like the mayor, I too have been Black my entire life. And, I don't know of any other days other than the ones that I was African American. And I celebrate those, and I celebrate what that means. And I also believe that during the visioning of this project, that there was a task force that was created of community members, and the community members came forward at that time, and the thing that they predominantly agreed upon was that they would love to see that, due to the historical significance of the Sunset Lounge, that it is operated by someone that is Black or of African American descent. And I could be mistaken, but I do believe that that was the sentiment that was relayed and presented to us. Correct, Mr.
But not a part of the RFP.
It is not a part of the RFP, but it is something where the community weighed in heavily and said that that is something that they wanted to see. It is absolutely, Mayor, to your point, not a part of the RFP. I think the important thing to consider is that when we reviewed the bidders for that responded to the RFP, that the bidders that were forwarded to the commissioners to consider were qualified candidates
But,
that it responded.
well, both just went through the RFP process. So I believe during the RFP process, we set a minimum threshold that we expected them to get through relative to the technical review committee. Neither participant met the threshold, so we waived it in order to continue on through the RFP process.
But they were identified as qualified.
I don't know that
And
they
that's
were
how
ever
they
identified as
came
qualified. They were ranked with a score, and we just proceeded through. But the original threshold that we had set for, I believe it was 80 points, neither candidate met, so it was waived in order to continue the RFP process throughout.
And was that waived because we recognized all of the different components, or you may not have the answer to this, but I believe part of the consideration was all of the different components that comprise the RFP, being the activation of the community, being the activation of the park, the restaurant, the entertainment, and that all of those things were taken into consideration, that there could be a growth period for the operator that was selected, an additional fiscal responsibility on behalf of the city in order to support the starting phase of the operator that was selected.
Commissioner, I'd have to go back and look at my notes on why specifically, but I believe it was mainly because, okay, well, if neither one got the amount of points, because we do want to sort of hear them out, and if neither one of them, maybe we set the points too high, so let's just continue with the process in order to see it through. But I don't know that there was anything more than just waiving it in order to finish the process and give both parties the opportunity to present to the board and go through the community tasting process.
Thank you very much. One of the original concerns that was listed in by how we ended up here today was that the KPIs were provided to VITA on January 3rd, and we did not receive a response back from them with edits until approximately 2 weeks ago.
No, the KPIs were part of the initial document that was sent to VITA on January 2nd, I believe. And in that document were essentially the categories that we listed here. And we actually made adjustments based on ongoing conversations with VITA on those KPIs. But they were outlined clearly in that January document. So if there was a time where it was first appeared in the actual agreement, it was on January 2nd when VITA was able to review that, and we started detailed discussions on the KPIs.
Mr. Mayor, may I respond to that question as well?
Yes.
So I was a recipient of the January operating agreement, and that was the first draft. The notion of the KPIs were listed, and the measures to be part of the KPIs were listed. Dan and I went through extensive conversation on the methodology, whether or not the KPIs should be defined in the operating agreement or whether it should be defined in as an exhibit. What we agreed on was the importance of the KPIs, that it would set performance, and that if we fail to meet the KPI threshold, that could be deemed a cause of default. And so I guess maybe we both are right, that yes, there was an understanding that there would be KPIs, and there was a general understanding of what would be measured. But at that point, we never agreed on the definition, the method, and the rating and the rate.
All right, let me turn to some other commissioners. Commissioner President Ward.
Thank you. So I went through the letters that were sent back and forth, and I went through the red lines of the operating agreement and management agreement. A lot of this is dated from late March, and you're saying that you guys sent back your first red line revision 17 days afterwards. But a lot of these bigger comments are from late March and then early April. So I'm having a hard time understanding that.
We could provide a chronology of the red line. You will see that the first draft of the operating agreement was heavily redlined by us. And maybe the March document, I don't know what version, may have been the carryover of all previous red lines. But I would say that most of the concerns and questions we raised in the agreement were accepted by staff. They did not ignore our changes or comments. And so, but if you look at the document, so if I could back up. So the negotiations, I guess, officially started in August. It wasn't until January that we saw the first draft of the operating agreement. And so what Mr. Cummings' letter is saying is that from August to January, it was in January that we saw the first draft of the operating agreement. If you look at that first draft, you will see that our comments were heavily redlined, and it dealt with pretty much the business terms. And that's the document that Mr. Fenton and I spent our marathon sessions on between January and February to get to an agreement.
Did you have a follow-up? You wanted to respond?
I just want to add a little context.
Speaking to the mic, please.
I'm sorry. I just want to add a little context to this negotiation and the development of the agreements, the operating agreements, or drafts. So most of the documents that Tony's talking about were documents between he and your consultant. We were told as the lawyers that we weren't supposed to do anything with the documents until they had developed a draft. They developed a draft, sent it to the CRA's attorney. She then presented it to me for comments, and that was in March. That was the, quote, first draft that, as lawyers, we could comment to. Once she developed that, I responded to comments, and I think that was in April, when we really got a, quote, I guess, final draft, but a draft that we were negotiating against. Up until that point, we were told that the lawyers were not supposed to touch the document, that they were working through business terms, and then the document would be sent to us for comments as a legal team, if you will. And I think you can confirm that with your staff.
Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I did. So just trying to get a clear understanding of, because, you know, I read the letter about there were delays on because of us when it came to working with contractors, which I'm kind of confused about, and I got a little clarification from staff, and I'd love to hear what you all have to say about that. But also, you know, if you're saying that you're okay with the pro forma and you wanted to move forward with this version, which I wouldn't, because there's a lot of red lines and comments on the side of it, so I don't see how you could move forward with it. But you have crossed out the proposed operating budgets are expected to align with the pro forma. So which one is it? Are you okay with it, the operating budget aligning with the pro forma, or are you not okay with it?
From the last document that Mr. Haygood replied to were minimal corrections. And what we presented in our April 10th letter for the initial operating budget is what we propose to be part of the agreement, and that lines up with the last draft. It is, I should say, it's intended to line up with the last draft of the operating agreement that I've seen. And what was provided, I think it was the March correspondence that not only, so we were asked in March to provide our initial operating agreement. I'm sorry, our initial year one budget, apologize. And so in my transmittal on April 10th, or in Darren's transmittal on April 10th, the initial year one operating budget was remitted as required. We created a matrix to say what else was submitted, because not all the items were required to be submitted by us to be part of the exhibit. The year one budget was, the KPIs that were provided to us, we reported back and said they were incomplete. And we provided a separate correspondence to say what our concerns were and our unreadiness. And then there were some other items that are probably more aligned to us working together, or on the CRA side, we said, look, in the interest of getting the agreement executed, perhaps there are some items that can become part of the requirements for delivery that we're required to deliver in 90 days, or if we fail to do that, then the agreement is terminated.
Did you have a?
I'll hold off right now, thank you.
And so, Commissioner, if you have a copy of the April 10th correspondence, it's actually almost it's the third page, fourth page, depending if it's a copy. You'll see this matrix, and this matrix identifies all the exhibits that are supposed to be part of the operating agreement, and the status of each one, whether it's a VITA responsibility or a CRA responsibility or both. And it has a percentage that what's not completed, in our estimation, what percentage of completion that item is.
On the issue of exhibits, the operating agreement requires exhibits to be attached, presumably before you sign it. So I heard a comment earlier that you're ready to sign the draft after the operating agreement today, but how can you do that when the exhibits aren't finalized?
What I said, and if my comments were misspoken, what I said that if the operating agreement was signed today, I outlined all the caveats you have in the agreement that hold us to performance. And so we did submit the year one budget. The agreement does not require us to submit a 5-year pro forma, though we did submit it. And all the other things that we're required to submit, we think there's two issues that are left. One is the underlying issues of KPIs, which I think that we could resolve in one meeting. You heard from staff on the FF&E and equipment. It's what you have in your budget that might have a fiscal impact. And the other concern has been the size of the kitchen that has not only been raised by our master chef, but I think previous consultants to you have also indicated the inadequacy of the kitchen for a facility of its size. And so I think that one is going to require some creativity.
Mayor, let me say this. I don't think the operating agreement is ready to be signed either. We still don't know. I mean, we haven't even gotten a response from the CRA as to the points we raised when we responded to it. So it's not ready to be signed. We don't know what the CRA's position is on various issues that we raised.
All right. Staff, what is your position on the status of the exhibits? I believe that was the heart of your presentation, but I just want you to state it.
Well, I guess it depends on which exhibit. Some of them have been provided, but I think there are some that still obviously need to be worked on.
Summarize for me or for us the exhibits that remain open.
Yeah, let's start with the pre-opening equipment piece. Let's start there, right? Just use as an example. We worked, and I'm going to use the we here because this isn't just one. This isn't just one. The whole team, right? When I say we worked on the approach to try to gather the information that's needed to submit this. The intent was always to have a finalized list as an exhibit for a couple of reasons. The biggest one was that would assure the commissioners that the pre-opening budget essentially worked within what was proposed in terms of pre-opening equipment. So the goal was always to have that exhibit completed, and what we had all talked about was having an initial submission, and the back and forth conversation was we understood that the first submission wasn't going to be perfect by any means. We knew there was going to be work. And we had anticipated probably 2 or 3 rounds in a positive way of refining what was submitted so we could come to this group, the commissioners and mayor, and be able to say, here's an agreed upon pre-opening budget with agreed upon equipment. Or if we did that exercise and we said, you know what, there may be some needs here that we hadn't anticipated, we wanted that to be done as part of the operating agreement being signed. And we felt that was a material piece. And spent a lot of time, Darren, as chef, was involved with this too, so we spent a lot of time trying to figure out sources. I mean, we got into it full detail here on how to complete that. We did receive a first cut at that list, whatever the date was that everybody was mentioning, but that was the first list that we got a chance to review. We would then now review it, go back and forth, work together to try to really finalize that list so that we can assure the commission just what I'd said earlier.
Mr. Mayor, may I?
So this is a list of the pre-opening equipment,
Pre-opening equipment.
and that has not been finalized yet.
Correct.
And that is to be an exhibit to the operating
correct.
agreement.
Yeah.
And you only got the first draft of the pre-opening equipment when?
April 18th.
April 18th.
Yeah, and then also, Mayor, just to answer your question, KPIs, the 5-year pro forma, and then the parking plan, those are the other remaining outstanding exhibits.
Do you agree that the 5-year pro forma is not an exhibit to the document?
No, it needs to be.
But it's
So you're
not
saying
now.
it should be an exhibit?
It should be, yes.
But it's not now.
All right.
If Mr. Mayor, if I may ask you a question, maybe a little bit more succinctly, now you can understand why I had marathon sessions. So the CRA on FF&E that you referenced, we said is 70% complete. Our proposal is, if time's of the essence, then let's finalize it during the requirements of delivery period, right? You just brought on consultants, Song and Associates, Vita, you brought Vita back that can help with getting this complete. So we either complete it now, or we can make it a requirement in the section of the requirements for delivery. Operator property. Vita is contributing more than $50,000. They're contributing their liquor license, which they're valuing at $500,000. So that is shown as operator property. That's Exhibit B. The current agreement that we saw says Exhibit C is the initial menu and pricing. That's complete. Exhibit D is the organizational chart. With some tinkering that we need to do, we said that's 99% complete. The KPI for year one, it's just the KPI for year one is the disagreement as to what should be the year one KPI. Aside from clarifying the measures, we said the year one should focus on sales, profitability, the event mix, and I forget what the fourth one was. But if there need to be 9 KPIs, and if that's your pleasure, then they just need to measure up to 100% and be clear. So that's on their part to fix. Exhibit F is the year one initial operating budget. That was transmitted with the April 10th letter. As far as we're concerned, it's complete. If they're saying they want to add another exhibit for a 5-year, well, that's complete because they have it in their April 10th transmittal. And then the last one is the parking plan. I was told they have a parking plan. I don't know if anyone on the team has seen it. So if they've drafted a parking plan, we just need to see it. What we say is 50% complete. We understand where the parking is supposed to occur. We don't know of the trolleys. I know that might have created some concern that we saw that there are some nearby lots that are adjacent to the Sunset, and we asked, can they be used temporarily for parking? I will tell you, as the one who developed the event center and the phase 1 of the marina development, the reason why you don't see restaurants along the waterfront is any experienced restaurateur will tell you they will not put in a restaurant if there is an issue on parking. We open this up tomorrow, if we get the crowd that we expect, and if folks have to walk blocks away and feel for their safety or bad weather, it's going to hurt the operation. So the parking plan that is the CRA responsibility is probably the next critical item that should be negotiated, and it should be done carefully in consideration of the public and not what's in the convenience of just the CRA or the operator. So,
If you and Dan want to respond to either of those?
Well, the parking plan was submitted as part of the last version. And this has been something that I've been very clear with Vita on. So that's a bit frustrating. On the remaining items that I don't know how I can, from staff's perspective, in good faith, bring an operations agreement without knowing what the pre-opening costs are going to be for the lounge. It's just, that's critical to budgets. That's critical to understanding the full cost. And currently, while they mentioned the bringing the alcohol license, it's always intended to be currently in the agreement, it's a reimbursement. So it's something that, and that's so that we can hang on to the alcohol license in the event that it needs to be terminated. So for all intents and purposes, it's a $50,000 contribution, with the CRA being on the hook for all other costs, including any gaps moving forward. And they still share in the profits of any success. So, which is designed, and that's the way that it's currently designed. But I think that there's a lot of questions related to the pre-opening, and I would highly recommend not approving an agreement to just make it a condition of approval, because that could become very, very expensive.
Let me go to Commissioner, let me see if any other commissioners haven't spoken yet. Commissioner Fox, you have any questions? Commissioner Baduzzi, you have any questions? Yeah, no, yes?
I have a few.
Okay.
I'm not sure which one I should ask first, though. I guess the question for me and how do we move forward is, are we on the right path? Are we making progress? Are we with the right people, with the right ideas? And is there a sustainable plan or pathway forward? And it looks like obviously we're not prepared right now. We haven't come to a meeting of the minds where we can move forward right now. How long do both sides think it could take? There's been so much time put into this. I'd hate to see us just throw the towel in, but at the same time, we have to be stewards and good stewards of public funds. And we've spent so much money on this over the last few years. And I'm just concerned, especially with JLL, $22,000 a month, and that we're even thinking that I don't know if it's because of this particular group, that we may have to continue paying JLL that much over the next 3 years. I'm not sure if we'd have to pay that with another group, or if it's because of issues you see with this group. But I'm just not sure. This endeavor would be challenging for an institution, a large institution, that was very financially stable and had endowments of millions, if not tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. It's a big undertaking, especially since we've put so much time, effort, and money, public funds, into this thing. And I just don't know if what the good or correct pathway forward. So I come back to the question: are we making progress? Are we on the right path with the right people? And do we have a sustainable plan to move forward? And I don't know that I can answer that now. And I have concerns about the amount of money and the amount of time that we're spending on this. So, maybe Vida can answer the question for me. How much more time is this going to take?
From our standpoint, I think we can get it done in 2 weeks. I think that letter says and outline the 2 sticking points that you raise. I understand the difficulty that Chris has to endure as the director of a CRA. You did not put in front of us a facility lease agreement. If this was a facility lease agreement and you asked Vida to be the master tenant, it would be a typical real estate transaction that you probably have seen, where we have to return whatever it is you want as a return of that investment. When you have a chance to look at the operating agreement, you are operating a restaurant. You are operating a nightclub, and you're holding us to the performance of operating a nightclub and a restaurant. As a former banker, I will tell you that is the most difficult credit facility to underwrite. But that's what you sent us in your first draft. You didn't send us a facility agreement, a lease agreement with a reverter to return if we failed to perform. So in spite of all of that, we have done our best. It's your building. I said early on in the first 90, 120 days, as a commercial real estate owner, it is your responsibility to tell us what the TI allowance is. and for us to work within that budget. If you got finishes and colors that you want us to adhere to, it is your responsibility to tell us what to choose from. None of that was provided. So you would have, in my opinion, a significant.
Tony, you know
part
that's
sort
not
of-
true. I'm sorry, that is not true.
Well, you have a.
I did an entire Dropbox with everything, and that was done back in October. It was a Dropbox with every CAD drawing, with all of V-Star's drawings, everything. You know that we provided
And your
all of that stuff.
responsibility and your action for us was to do what with it?
You
Was
requested
to do
it.
what? So
You requested
our
it.
major chef said that the kitchen was inadequate, that the drawings.
And I'll tell you that we have consultants
Okay,
that said it was
okay,
fine.
okay. What we're not going to do is sit here and listen to two parties argue with each other, because that's not productive. So we have a disagreement of, a difference of opinion as to at least that aspect of it. I think a more pertinent question for me is this pre-operating budget. You're saying we got the initial draft of the pre-operating budget when?
April 18th, Mayor.
And it was, you had discussions about a pre-operating budget back in, what, January, February?
Yeah, I mean, the chef's here too, he can speak to this. We discussed approaches, you know, how to do this. Really, Chef, starting when we all met in January, we really started talking about it then. And one of the things that came up, just as an example, and Chef, I think you'll collaborate here, was there was concern over what is some of the things that are already pre-approved, if you will, in the construction budget, and what is going to be part of this. So we had discussions there, and the final outcome was to just give us all the thoughts. Like, don't worry about any possible duplication. Just give us everything that you think, which we just got, by the way, which we do have, we just got it. But give us the full laundry list, and then let's work together to kind of take that list and refine it down, if you will. So that took a while.
So the
to be able to-
suggestion that the pre-operating budget is done is not correct.
We
The
have to-
Pre-operating budget, their draft of the pre-operating budget is done.
Right, we
but
have
we
to-
haven't gone through it in,
Correct. We have to go back and forth and get it fine-tuned so it's, so it's really ready.
and that
Right.
process typically takes how long?
Well, I mean, Tony likes to lock ourselves in a room for a day, but it's a pretty intense session to go back and forth just to get it right, and we want to make sure that it's right, not just right in the sense of, something to put in the exhibit, but that it does fulfill the needs. I also want to make one quick digression on the kitchen. It was actually, just so you know, there's a lot of things that happen in these processes that are kind of interesting. We had a great discussion, I think, Chef, you'd agree, with a designer, where the chef was able to take his menu and really translate the menu to the equipment that was needed. And the designer was on the phone, so it wasn't just, it was, and I actually thought, I think there's an outcome, there's an outcome of that session where there are adjustments that are going to be made, in the kitchen to really, so it was actually, I would argue, it was really kind of a cool session that we did, because we were all kind of strategizing on, how to deliver, kind of the chef's vision when it came to the kitchen. So just, so I think there was some actual real tangible progress there.
So there's significant work that has yet to be done on the pre-operating budget.
Yeah, we need
Significant work.
to spend some time and really get that.
All right. Commissioner Fox, you have something you haven't spoken yet.
Thank you. Thank you all for bringing this to us today. I appreciate hearing from you. I supported you from the beginning. I voted for you twice. This is my district. My community was very supportive of VITA from the beginning, and I always try to support small minority businesses, local businesses whenever possible. And so just really also excited and looking forward to having the Sunset Lounge open. But I also have a lot of other needs in the neighborhood, quality of life issues, sidewalks that are broken, other things where, the more time and expenses that we put into this building, that takes away from the other things that I would like to be working on in the neighborhood. So I want to figure out, I think you said that you believe we could have an operating agreement in 2 weeks if we gave you 2 more weeks, but I'm looking at the timeline here of 60 meetings that you have had in 8 months, and most of the things I'm hearing today that are still issues sound like they're the same things that were in the RFP as questions. We requested a budget to be in the RFP and KPIs, and the operating expenses and things like that. So it's not my area of expertise, but it seems like the kind of things that would have already been put together. And so I guess if you could just talk a little bit more about in the next 2 weeks, if we give you time, because I want to get this building open. I want Vita to be successful, and I know the community will be thrilled to be moving forward, but I also just feel like this is not my money. This is the city's money. This is residents' money. I don't want to just continue to have to be putting things into this that we weren't anticipating. So if you could talk a little bit more about how you think 2 more weeks is going to get these things done that haven't been able to, I guess, be finalized in the last 8 months. Thanks.
Well, we could start off with having the CRA respond to our last draft of the operating agreement, which I have no idea why they never did. That was it. We never got any comments back on the operating agreement itself. Now, other than Mr. Rube's letter, which addressed 3 issues. There are more issues in the operating agreement unless they've agreed to them, which we don't know. I think we're pretty close, at least on the document itself, the operating agreement. The exhibits, obviously going to take some more negotiations. It wasn't anything finalized. I think we're waiting for responses. And 2 weeks, I think I can only speak from the operating agreement itself, not the exhibits. I'll defer to the chef and Tony on that.
The exhibits are part of the operating
Yeah, the exhibits are part of the operating agreement.
Yes, I understand.
And you're correct, Mr. Mayor, the exhibits are part of the operating agreement. I think I just went through each one, and I think on the CRA side, it seems that there's some concern, consternation on the KPIs, and I think that what I've heard, given the comments we raised, that I think that has been resolved. From what I've heard, that our concerns, if we get it back from the CRA, have been resolved, so that they have received our comments, and we're waiting on their response. The FF&E, Mr. Mayor, it's, I see the concern on your face. I think the FF&E,
Well, we're talking about a 5-year pro forma, which we believe should be part of the exhibit.
and it's been submitted, so all it needs to be is made an exhibit. All it needs to be is
pre-opening
made is.
budget, which has not even been vetted by my staff yet, so you got to be some going back and forth on that. Okay, so there's
We-
still work to be done. You
Yes,
think
sir.
all that can get done in 2 weeks?
We have submitted the 5-year budget. If there's some feedback on it, we welcome it. I think it include all the changes that your consultant asked us to make as we were negotiating the budget. It's just not mentioned as an exhibit to the agreement. It's been provided as a condition for negotiating.
I thought, didn't you say years 2 and 3 were taken out of the 5-year pro forma?
2 through 5.
2 through 5 were taken out of the 5-year pro forma? So that's,
So a 5-year pro forma was submitted, which we worked on, back to the whole spirit of this, right? We worked on that, Tony, probably back and forth for a couple of months, really trying to fine tune that. It was submitted. Our assumption was that was going to go in as an exhibit, right? So that was going to,
it's a 1-year pro forma.
No, that 5-year pro
Yes.
forma was going in because we believed that it's an important exhibit because it shows everybody, how do we see the future years. That was one. And then I just want to say one thing too. Everybody's using this word negotiation. A lot of this really has to do with execution. You know what I mean?
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I don't know. It's really about execution. And so I think that's really the key is how do we execute?
All right. President Ward, then Commissioner Ward.
This isn't what I was going to question, but execute what? Execute the deliverables?
Yeah, so for example, when we talk about the pre-opening budgets, it's not that there's disagreement. Meaning it's not as if the pre-opening budget was submitted and Chris and I or others goes, oh my gosh, we don't understand this. We just didn't receive it until very recently. So therefore, we need time to go back and forth. It's really about execution. It's how do we make sure that we can execute and get all this done. Really, to Tony's point, it's not as if there are like major, sort of strategic or visioning kind of disagreements. It's really about execution.
Okay. sorry, Mayor. My question was really kind of related to this commentary, and maybe you corrected yourself. So you don't have a disagreement on having to provide a 5-year pro forma, and that would go back into the operating agreement as it was originally listed in there? As
Correct.
an exhibit?
Correct.
Okay. Now, I do want to make it aside because this conversation in these emails has talked about the contribution. There's only $50,000 being contributed. You say a liquor license is being contributed. Contribution means you're providing that over into a partnership, but you're not. That stays with you. That ownership is with you. I don't have an interest, and that's a different discussion of us buying that from you. But that's not technically a contribution. Anybody that I would think would need to be operating this entity would need to have a liquor license to be
That's
able
correct.
to operate it. That's not a contribution. So I in particular scrap that and just say you're contributing $50,000 in cash to this partnership that we have going on. Secondly, the kitchen commentary is really concerning me because if you guys can't move forward with that and then you only have $50,000 that you're contributing, does that mean that's being eaten out of the $2 million that we've already budgeted for other items? Who's paying for that?
So we have $2 million that are a little over $2 million that's set aside for the FF&E. And as I mentioned, through a variety of different line items, approximately 1.5 million. So based on just rough numbers, without getting into the details, because we haven't had a chance to review it, it looks like there's about $900,000 left over to finish out the Sunset Lounge. But that's that's using every single dime for a whole bunch of other costs, and I'm really concerned that there's not going to be a lot of money for other items either related to build out or as we get into operations with shows and things like that, there's not going to be any funding available for any of those items. So really, that's kind of it. And then the Sunset Lounge is going to have to support itself. And judging by the first year, there's still going to be a significant gap that we're going to have to fund on top of that, even aside from the lack of dollars that we currently have based on what they set with the pre-opening budget. So there's a lot of unknown costs, to put it bluntly.
And I would address that, Commissioner Ward, from a former banker perspective. So this is a 5-year contract, maybe 2, and possibly a 5-year renewal. Even if the requirement was for us to make the own investment in FF&E and take it with us when we leave, the ability to get financing on a short-term lease is going to be very difficult. And so it's your building. It was implied that the furniture and fixtures, after the lease is over, would revert to the city. It would remain to be yours. And so the issue of the contribution and the liquor license, I think there is some language that if the contract is terminated and it's over, that it does give you the option to purchase the liquor license.
It does.
Yes.
That's not contribution.
But that's
go
not a
ahead.
contribution.
And that's, again, I know you don't want to negotiate publicly, but I think if that's a concern and what we're hearing, we just have to discuss it.
I just want to, yeah, because I remember the background from the chef, and I just want to hear from you a little bit on this kitchen. And you came up here for a reason earlier, and I want to hear from you because you have a great background, and we were all impressed with you. And so can you talk a little bit about what's been happening in the kitchen? There seems to be some disagreement on whether we need to do anything to the kitchen or not, depending upon this particular partnership. So could you elaborate?
Marvin Woods. I typically go by Chef Marvin Woods. I have 35 years plus in the hospitality industry. I'm a cookbook, chef, author. I've been in this project since the beginning. From the first time I stepped into the Sunset Lounge, answering the RFP for a full-service restaurant, I stated the kitchen is inadequate. We went through what we went through, and we picked the conversation back up in August. The first thing I said in August, the kitchen is inadequate. I will explain. You have a 150-seat restaurant with a 25-seat bar downstairs. Upstairs, you can provide up to 350 meals, sit down. You have a kitchen that's 800 square feet. Kitchen rule of thumb, 101 around the world, is 1/3 of your full space. 1/3 of your full space should be kitchen. The Sunset Lounge is 20,000 square feet. I came up with workarounds. It got pushed back up until January/February is when they hired a consultant and got on the phone with me, and we talked about the workarounds. I suggested we put the equipment in the kitchen that's on the first floor. This is the 800 square feet. We either need to buy or build an external kitchen, an ancillary kitchen, or another building. I found the company that does that, certified. I submitted the plans. I also said at the bar, I would like to take one of the squares, the bar's set up in a square, take one of the squares and set that up as a cold kitchen, i.e. think about a sushi restaurant, because you don't have enough space inside the building to plate, to prepare. On the second floor, underneath the stage, I suggested we have rollaway carts, hot boxes, if you will, in my industry, to be able to provide hot meals on the second floor for a party of 200, 300, 350. It would be on wheels. We would have stainless steel tables. The kitchen equipment and the ancillary part would provide for the food upstairs. This is what I suggested. It was only in the end of February that I got a conversation with the consultant that actually agreed on what we're trying to do. This ties into the ROI. We suggested or projected 2.6 in the first year of revenue. And believe it or not, we would take a loss. In year 2, we would start making money, right? If you change from a full-on restaurant, bar, you now change the price points. Right now, I submitted a menu at $55 a person. That's pretty low. You eat around town in West Palm Beach or in regular restaurants, $55 a person is very, very low. I suggested we can do that. Why? Because we have the second floor, we can do banquets, we can make up the difference, all right? So that speaks to being able to be affordable. If you take a regular concept and turn it into a fast casual concept, which was suggested to us, turn it into a watering hole, which was suggested to us, turning into small plates, which was suggested to us, you will fail. It will never make money at all. So, one of the reasons why discussion is happening right now is because when I submitted what we needed for the kitchen, it's close to $900,000. It's not in the budget, we're told. So, how do we get past this? Because at the end of the day, you have a full-on restaurant with the second floor event space with a rooftop bar. It's more than just a single restaurant. There's 3 different operations that you're trying to provide for. And I'm gonna talk about the FF&E real quick. So, if there's 150 seats downstairs, just think about this. For every water glass, kitchen 101, I need 1.5 water glasses for downstairs. You multiply that every salad plate, every dinner plate, every knife, every fork. That's one budget. When you get to upstairs, if I'm gonna do a banquet for 350 people, again, 1.5 of everything. That's water glasses, wine glasses, plates, etc. So when the number was presented to us, we told him it was inadequate. You haven't presented enough money to do all that you want to do in this building.
You want me to keep going?
Go ahead.
So here's the good news here, right? The good news is there wasn't disagreement here, just so you know, at all. There wasn't disagreement, right? So what we did is we had the chef, I was in the meeting, again, I told you that earlier, it was very cool, with the designer, go through very carefully what adjustments needed to be made, right? It was a very productive session. It was actually, Chef, I think you actually, we talked afterwards, and I think you felt good that, okay, there was clear receptivity towards how we need to adjust, how we needed to adjust the kitchens to make them work. So that process is in place. I think there's an outcome there. I think the designer will have an outcome from that meeting, right? So again, this is not about negotiation in a sense of disagreement at all. This is really about how we take the key ideas here and how do we execute. I mean, how do we figure out how they're going to work? And as it relates to pre-opening budgets, we still need the ability to just look at the whole thing together and then be able to go through it carefully and say either we do need additional capital or here's where we are. So that's again, we're not necessarily disagreeing. We just have to see, and we just got something that I think maybe that now starts to get where we want to get, but we need to vet that together and then come back and say, to the chef's point, we either can execute or we may need some more resources, but we're just not in a position.
You say need some more resources like there's a piggy bank.
No, I understand, but I mean, we're not in a position yet to be able to see where we are.
The additional resources is from this body, and so I'm already hearing
Right.
that there's a $900,000 expense, which we hadn't anticipated. And Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, we only had $1.5 million devoted to this. So there are red flags already, and red lights and sirens already going off in my head, just hearing that. And we haven't even gone through their numbers. The last thing I want to do is open up something that's undercapitalized, because that is a recipe for failure. So I don't think this is a problem that gets resolved in 2 weeks. But let me let some other people, go ahead, and Chris, you want to respond to that?
Well, I was just going to say, the reason I pushed back was because the board has been, to date, pretty adamant about, okay, there has been so much put into this building. Let's work with what we have. So that's where the pushback came initially with the chef on the size of the kitchen, because it's a brand new building.
Okay. Commissioner Warren and Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Fenton, because when everyone entered into the room today, we were talking about amicable conversation. We were talking about how we were collaborating and moving forward, and then I heard a little bit of some blame and looking at different things from a way that did not sound as though we were focused on the end goal, which is the success of the Sunset Lounge. It is more important to look at how we successfully move forward than to point fingers. And what I'd like to say is, if we separate this highway into its respective lanes, and when I think of the amount of money that's been spent, and I've heard us talk about that, I would like to in no way imply that the amount of money that the city has invested here is a result of anything that has happened with the operator. Because all of the investment that we've made for the construction, there were a lot of things that we've known moving forward. And when I joined this dais in 2021 and we added additional funds to the construction of the Sunset Lounge, we knew at that time that there was, and it was millions of dollars at that time, we knew then that there was an issue with parking. We knew then that there was an issue with the kitchen. We knew then that we had gone backwards and forwards and sideways in conversations with that kitchen, and that that the CRA, during those conversations with the architect and with the construction company, that there were concessions that were made. There were things where we said, we cannot do that because that's going to cost more money. That's not the best way forward because that's going to cost more money. So we can't now today say that the money that it's going to cost in order to get it right is something that is a result of what's being proposed by the people that will be running the kitchen, because we knew this. This is not new news. This is something that we knew would be a factor. So it's something that we need to look at today, and not to say that the operator is the reason that cost is before us. And if we look at the budget and 1.5 or whatever is allocated, as a body, we knew that these things were going to come forward. We knew that they would come to fruition. We also knew with parking, and Mr. Rugg, you can correct me if I'm wrong, we began to pursue agreements with nonprofits in the community and businesses in the community to provide overflow parking, because we looked at the square footage, we looked at events, we looked at the restaurant, we looked at all of the things that we wanted to activate at one time, and we knew as the funder to this project that that would be a factor. So Now I'm looking forward to what the solutions will be and how we can do that expeditiously. Because I believe that when I look at the numbers and what it's costing us as a city to maintain this property without being operated, I think that's where we're having the biggest issue. So when I look at this, I want to see how we can move forward the most logically, the most cost effectively, what's going to make the most sense. And I can't fathom how it would make more sense to start over from ground zero when we've already gotten this far in negotiations. We've already gotten this far in our understanding. I need that to make sense to me.
Commissioner, did you want to respond in any way, staff? Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you. My question's for Mr. Brown, and then a follow-up for the consultant. In the beginning of your 15 minutes, you told us your extensive background working in CRAs, and I was just curious, this 47 meetings to 60-plus meetings, is this typical of public-private partnerships, of negotiations like this? Because that seems excessive to me when I first heard those numbers.
It was required, right? There were semi-sessions. So there were sessions with the kitchen designer. There were sessions that he and I had on the operating agreement. There were sessions on the financials. So when you look at it, breaking it down, yes, it probably was reasonable. In my earlier comments, right, we weren't negotiating a facility lease where Vita was going to be the master tenant, and you didn't have to worry about KPIs and submitting a budget, right? If it had been a simple facility lease, then we would understand that regardless as to what revenues generated, you would have probably set the parameters. So the short answer to your question is, were there a lot of meetings? Yes, and I think that's why our April 10th transmittal said, look, we could keep going round and around and around. We have a process built in that if we meet the deliverables, we get the keys. When we get the keys, if we don't meet that deliverable, then we terminate. And so I think that was the point we reached, that we could keep tinkering with this, but the main thing is let's get open and let's operate. So I'm not going to cry about the number of meetings, but I think that, you know, they could have been a little bit more efficient. But
I appreciate that you won't cry about them, but I guess, and I appreciate what everybody has said about them being collaborative, and it seems like friendly and productive sometimes. I guess I'm just weighing this request for more time and staff's recommendation. So my next question is, Mr. Fenton, at the beginning, your background was also shared in that you lead the department at your organization related to this. So I imagine you've worked on other partnerships like this before. Is this typical, and should we allow more time, that it will take another 47 meetings?
Well, let me say this. I mean, here's how I would like to answer this in terms of the spirit of the meetings, right? Because I think this is important, that sometimes we would go into a situation like this where CRA would say to us, just, you know, basically there's sort of no negotiation almost, or there's no sort of collaboration. It's literally just sort of driving to the finish line. The spirit of this was collaboration. So it really was. And so, when we talk about 47 meetings, part of that was because we wanted to make sure we were also available. I mean, we wanted there to be we wanted to set all of this up for success. So we felt like JLL was coming in here, which we still are, right? That's still our goal here, is to ultimately end up with a successful outcome. So I don't know that it's a matter of, is this typical, but what the goal was. So we made sure, and we wanted to make sure, we still do this, I mean, almost to this minute, is we want to make sure we're available, we're here to be helpful. That was the whole spirit of how we work together, right?
Commissioner, I don't know if your question related to timing. I wish I was getting paid $27,000 a month. I'm not. It's a flat fee, and my requirement is to deliver an executed operating agreement on behalf of Vita and the city. And so my services terminate once you do that. And so I've just been singularly focused on getting an operating agreement, and I stand by my earlier comments. I think that the negotiations have been fair. Wearing my CRA hat, you have tools that can kick them out if they fail. And I do think that enough time has elapsed. And I will tell you, if Darren was here, he'll tell you he's extremely committed to operating the Sunset. There have been many reasons why he could have just walked away from it. And we're here today because they believe they can do it and do it in a way that would make you proud.
You feel the city's negotiating in good faith?
Do I believe the city is negotiating in good faith? I do. I wouldn't say you hadn't. I think there have been areas where we've questioned times when you weren't, but I would say overall, and I guess I'm saying it publicly, that I think that when there were issues, I think your CRA director has a tough job. Let me put it this way. He has a tough job, and I understand that. And so I gave deference to the fact that he has many masters. So, yes.
Mayor, I have follow-up,
Yes, go
if I
ahead.
could. So I remember specifically one time that Mr. Fenton or Mr. Rugg, you mentioned that we thought we had come to an agreement, like on KPIs we had discussed, and then it was sent back and there were changes. And maybe there was one or two others that you mentioned as well like that. And I guess I want to go back to my original question, which is to the entity in which we are negotiating and, eventually creating a partnership with. And so earlier, you all answered that Vita Lounge Group would be the sole membership of Sunset Hospitality Group, I think, and that it was 50-50 between Darren Cummings and Kenneth Yang. But then now I'm looking at what you guys handed us here, and it says that the management here is, it looks like 50-50 between Darren and Chef Woods.
That's just the Sunset Lounge. So what you're looking at is the org chart of who are going to manage the operations. But
it says principal in Vita Lounge under Marvin Wood's name.
I don't have the.
And so I guess what I'm asking here is who are we negotiating with? Who is really making these decisions? And the people in the negotiations or in the meetings with staff and our consultant, it sounds like we're collaborative and we're friendly, but then we take this back and then changes come afterwards. And I just want to know, is that going to continue to happen?
It's Vita Lounge, who will set up a special purpose entity. I think it's going to be the Sunset Hospitality Group. Right. And I'm not sure if you're a principal in that or if that's also 100% owned by Vita Lounge. But Vita Lounge will be in control of the Sunset Hospitality Group. There's a level of executive management that'll likely be under contract to Vita Lounge to deal with management issues. And then the project team will be in contract with Sunset Hospitality Group, a specific direct expense to the Sunset Hospitality Group. And so I think that's what we were trying to convey in that illustration.
Thank you.
Commissioner Baduzzi.
Thank you. I think I have more questions now than answers. So we know that the sticking point really here is the inclusion of the KPIs on the agreement. So that's one hurdle we need to get over, whether we can do that in the next couple of weeks. But we're also hearing about the inadequacy of the kitchen, and which will potentially require a significant additional capital contribution of public funds. Mr. Rugg, would you agree that the kitchen is inadequate for the size of venue?
I wouldn't agree with it. I mean, it was designed by a licensed architect, and we had Post and Beam, another consultant. I mean, it was before my time. They looked at the kitchen and said that they could serve a certain amount of customers with it, and it didn't have a alarm there. And then generally speaking, I mean, it's a brand new building. So I'm not quite sure what can be done about the kitchen at this point, other than maybe adding some type of food truck, which is a component that we had talked about. Because, I mean, to start knocking down walls and doing things is just, I mean, then I mean, that's going to significantly delay things if we start getting into major construction. So I think the only way through this is some type of ancillary kitchen, which could be a food truck or something like that. But the cost to that in the preliminary discussions was about $250,000. That was the original proposal.
I didn't hear the first part of his response. Did he say that he agreed or
Wait,
didn't?
I'm not
I didn't
finished.
hear him.
Can I add
You
one
didn't hear his
comment?
question?
No, I heard the question, but I didn't hear the first part of the response. Did he say that he agreed that it was insufficient, or
Said
he
didn't
agreed that
agree
it
with
was?
that. Repeat the answer to his question. As
Oh,
to whether
I'm
you
sorry.
agree.
I'm sorry, Commissioner. So Commissioner Peduzzi asked me if I thought the kitchen was adequate. Based on all of the fact that it was designed by a licensed architect, and there was some consultant that was hired in the middle of construction that looked at the design of the kitchen, who also said that the Sunset Lounge could operate sufficiently with it. I saw no reason why, it would be inefficient to run. So I was like, well, what we have is what we have. So we just have to make do with the construction of the building as it is. So,
Short
but as
answer is no, you don't agree that it's inadequate.
no, I don't agree that's inadequate.
Did you have a follow-up? Yeah,
Yes.
come on, Commissioner. All right, before we start, okay, so it's 4:31 now. We have the CRA meeting scheduled. We got a few cards. So I'm going to suggest we continue. I'm not trying to cut off debate. We continue talk up until 4:55, and then we can reconvene as a CRA after the city commission meeting, because that's notice to the public. We have to start the city commission meeting at 5. Does that present a problem for anyone on the dais?
It's no problem as long as if we need that time.
Well, yeah, I mean, okay, all right, but I'm just, and we do have a plan in place in case we get up to the 4:55 and we haven't finished the questions from here or even public comment. So, Commissioner Peduzzi.
Thank you. So I understand your response that leading up to this whole process, there was an architect and there was people that said it would be fine. But in light of what you've heard here tonight, and you're suggesting a food truck, I mean, the whole thing to me is just, we've spent how much money on this building, and we're talking about pulling up a food truck beside it to make it adequate as a kitchen? It's crazy to me. But did we have anyone involved in a restaurant consultant, someone that had an idea of what a kitchen needs to be for this size venue at any time? But leading up to this process?
So, and that's what I was saying. There was one, because I did get that question, and there was a consultant, Brad Johnson? Okay. I mean, Post and Beam was the consultant, but I mean, it was done in the middle of, during the construction process, who outlined that the kitchen was sufficient.
Good afternoon, Mayor, board members. My name is Darrell Bay. I was a consultant for the CRA at the time that that construction was going on. My job was to look at the construction and look at the design of what was going on with the kitchen and with the building itself. I brought in Mr. Woods as a chef to look at the kitchen. I brought in a gentleman by the name of Alexander Smalls to look at the kitchen as a chef, professional chef. And I brought in Brad Johnson of Post and Beam. And all three chefs said at that time that, and they made extensive reports that the kitchen was inadequate. Now, in terms of what I mean by inadequate, your RFP said you wanted a supper club and you want a full-service restaurant. So what we mean is that if you're going to have a full-service restaurant, you need to have a kitchen that's a third of the size of the building. And the kitchen there is not. There were reports. You have those reports. The CRA has the reports that outlines Mr. Brad Johnson's comments about the inefficiencies of that kitchen. So, but the idea is not pointing the finger. The idea is how we make it work. Because if it doesn't work for us, because we're a professional group. If it doesn't work for us, it's not going to work for anybody if you're going to have, answer your RFP, a full-service restaurant. That's the deal.
Okay, thank you for that insight. Did you have a further follow-up, Commissioner?
Not at this time, thank you.
Hey, Mayor, just personal privilege. I don't know if you want to take public comment now, so the people who came here don't have to wait till after the commission meeting?
We could do that. Board, you're fine with that?
Yes.
All right, so we will, we don't have too many cards, but we'll take these now before we get too close to 5. I do have a card from someone who does not want to speak. John McCarthy wants us, the Sunset Lounge has cost the taxpayers much more than planned, and now another 2 years have passed. Sell or give away the Sunset, or else we'll subsidize it forever. That's from John McCarthy. Okay. Folks who do want to speak, Gwen French and Sylvia Sharps. You can start making your way toward the podium, please. Are there any other cards down there? Okay. Gwen French.
Good afternoon. I'm 5 generations here in Palm
Could you
Beach
state your name
County,
and address for the record, please?
and I'm commenting on
Could
the
you
sunset.
state your name and address for the record, please?
All
State
right,
your name.
Gwendolyn Gilbert French, and I live at 1217 LaCoya Drive, and that's in Marsh Harbor, and I'm dying to get back to West Palm Beach, which I love.
Thank you.
Again, it's an emotional evening for me because I've spent quite a bit of my life here in West Palm Beach, and I'm enjoying it in my later life now. And the Sunset was a very, very special place for our family. My mom had 7 sisters and brothers, and they jumped in the Sunset to Count Basie, to Duke Ellington, to Ella Fitzgerald, and all these other great people. I am a debutante that actually was introduced to society in the Sunset in 1963, and I'm quite sure I see other debutantes in here this evening. That was a place that was quiet. It was a place that people went, they were safe there. I have a beautiful picture of the original builder and owner. He was a friend of our family, and people confuse that with Dennis Starks. Dennis Starks was his nephew, all right? We have roots in New Jersey. We have roots here in West Palm Beach. I don't know how he would feel this evening with what we've witnessed in here. He loved this city. Him and Cracker Johnson, you might not know about him, but I know the history. I'm a historian. They ran this city, and I'm a proud resident of West Palm Beach. And he would love to see that Sunset revitalized, and for our tourists to come here and enjoy the amenities that were afforded us. Dennis ran a tight ship in there. If you were drinking in there and it was a little too much, he put you out. People dressed accordingly in there. Women had on their lovely dresses that they probably purchased somewhere at Anthony's or Birdine's downtown. And I was probably 18 when I was able to go in the Sunset. We were Harlem. They had flow shows. I just saw someone in here whose parents ran the Club Alabama, all right? That was a place where people could get food at night, and it would not kill you because it was skunk that was cooked earlier. But in the meantime, it was a place to be and a place to be seen. All I'm saying to you is think about the historical community that we still have here and what it would bring to the tourists that come into this community. I have friends that come here, and I would love to take
Thank you very
them.
much, ma'am. Thank you very much. Sylvia Sharps.
Thank you.
Sylvia Sharps. I have 3 businesses at 401 North Rosemary. I too have been black all of my life, and I'm happy about it. I was one of the first people that worked with the CRA when they started doing the Heart and Soul Fest events, which was the original talks of renovating the greater Northwest area, which were the first talks of renovating the Sunset. And so we worked the neighborhoods and we talked to the people there. Some of those people have gone on now. But to see it come to this point is extremely satisfying. To see it to be completed would be like, I don't know, one of the greatest achievements as a part of my life that I've been a part of. Roadtrippers.com is a website that showcases venues that were on the Chitlin Circuit. This club is a historical monument that a lot of you may not know all the history that's involved, but it is something to be honored, period. And I personally am concerned because I don't want to see that history go. I don't want to see that history dissipate. I want it to be carried forth for our children and our great-grandchildren. I want to be on the map that's on roadtrippers.com as one of those places that can be visited as a Chitlin Circuit venue. That's what I want to see. And the sooner we can get to that point with intended talks and communication, regardless of the amount of time it may take for somebody to do it, if we can get through it and do it in a consensuary manner, it would be extremely beneficial, not only to the people in the neighborhood, but to other people that can see it as a historical mark. That's what's important. Every last one of us is going to die. 100 years from now, you hope somebody remembers who you are. But 100 years from now, I would love for them to remember that we worked hard to get the sunset open. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We do have a card from Melinda Grove. She does not wish to speak. She has a few questions. Will lunch and dinner be served? Projected revenue? With respect to revenue, what is the proposed amount of seats for musical acts? And last, what is the amount of dinners per event max? Those are her questions. Okay, so those are all, any other cards? All right, those are all of the, that's all the public comment. Now we can return to our regularly scheduled program. Who was speaking? Was that you, Commissioner Lambert? All right. Who else? Commissioner, President Ward.
It's all right, it's still new. I guess it draws the people back up to the podium, but I keep looking at this and knowing that, yes, to Commissioner Warren's point, we knew some of these issues were there. We knew the funds that it was going to take, more funds in rehab than we initially anticipated. My concern is we are a government operating a restaurant and looking at potentially continuing to pay 20-something thousand to consultants, operating FF&E, all of these things that go into it, and I'm just trying to balance that fact that we are stewards of this money. And to Commissioner Fox's point, there's other things that we could be utilizing on these funds to benefit the community in a broader manner while understanding that the sunset is important. And I guess, my question to, not our chef, but our banker, you mentioned the inability to get a loan and the things like that because of the way that this is described. And I'm not saying that this is a possibility, but when I looked at this, it was almost frustrating that this is not an operations lease. And you can put KPIs in a lease. I disagree with that assertion that you made earlier. You can put all of the things that you want into a lease. Would you then have the capability of bringing more money to the table so that we're not continuing to subsidize this?
I think the concern for the owner of Vita is the term of the lease and the amount of time they would have to recoup the investment. So that's the only issue I would see, is that I know they've had conversations with particular lenders, investors, but the issue is it's a 5-year lease officially, and you have the right to terminate it in year 2. And so, the magnitude of investment and the opportunity to get a return would have to be a short return relative to what might be the magnitude of the investment amount. And so I think it's just an economic issue, Commissioner Ward, in terms of how long will we have the opportunity to manage this asset on your behalf?
Follow? Yes.
So you're saying that if this was changed and you had more time.
Speaking to the mic.
oh, sorry. So you're saying if this was changed and you had more time, I mean, we have to have the ability that if you're not performing to terminate. It's reasonable. We can agree on that.
Yes.
So in that regards, if you still had that 2-year termination provision and we said, okay, your initial term would then be 10 years and we'd still have that right to terminate in 2 years, would you guys still be in the same position? Would you be looking for funding from other? I'm just trying to find the line because I'm really nervous about this.
Yeah, so I guess it would go back to the RFP, right? And so Vita did respond in knowing that it was going to be a short-term lease. So, or a short-term operating agreement, thank you. A short-term operating agreement. So, and I'm not going to pretend to be an attorney to say that whether or not you or staff have the ability to make it a longer lease because it was a longer operating agreement because it wasn't part of the RFP. But under the parameters of the RFP and what was disclosed I think is how we negotiated. And the short answer to your question, and it's been one that we've discussed internally, is that the length of the lease, impacts the level of return. We are sharing in the net income. So to your consultant's credit, right, we went through the pro forma. And in the end, if we return a net operating income, that is shared with the CRA. So we're all motivated to operate the facility profitably and to provide you a financial return.
If I may.
Yes.
There's a significant difference between an operating agreement and a lease. The terms are different. The operating agreement, you still own the building. The operator doesn't even have a possessory interest in the building. It's your business and they are only operating it. If you did a lease, it wouldn't even be an issue being 5 years and being able to stop at 2. It's a different animal altogether. And if you did a lease agreement, the terms, we wouldn't be talking about contributions of things of that nature. This, under operating agreement, this is your building. We're only in there operating it. So it wouldn't have anything to do with 2 years. No one would sign a 5-year lease to run a restaurant. You're going to need more time, obviously, because you're investing more. The city wouldn't expect the tenant the city wouldn't, as a landlord, be expected to carry a lot of the costs that you will under operating agreement. So it's just a different animal altogether.
But you agree you're only investing or contributing, what, $50,000?
Yeah, but this is your building. I mean, there was nothing in the RFP saying that the operator had to make a capital contribution.
I just wanted to know if you agree you're only contributing $50,000
Well, under
to the operations of this venture.
I'm sorry.
Are you only contributing $50,000 to the operation of this venture?
But it's your building.
I don't quit.
Yes, I agree.
It's a simple yes or no question.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Rube.
Sorry, Mayor. It was outlined in the RFP and it was discussed at length during the selection process that a capital contribution would be made.
Was that a requirement of the RFP?
It was in the RFP, Tony.
All right. Did you have a
And
follow-up?
Mr. Rugg, I approach you with respect, sir. Please do that in return. Thank you.
I did want to hear from Dan on that factor because I will disagree. A lease, you don't own the building. On commercial leases, you've got landlord and tenant improvements on both ends and allowances with that regard. So there's still with a lease, I'm just trying to understand where the lagging is on the contribution and turning to us to continue to subsidize this. If we needed to change how we're doing business to be able to make this work, then I'm more willing to look at that aspect than to keep going back and forth on this because it's like, I just look at the number at the end of the day, and we are, again, I say this and repeating myself, we're stewards of all this money. And so is this not a great business deal? I don't even think we need to be in the business of running restaurants. This is not government. This is you guys. So we partnered with someone to bring things to the table and say, we're going to create a budget. We are going to run this thing. We are going to do a great job. I think Chef's points on the kitchen are very well made. If there were issues with the design that you've brought in and said, hey, these are issues, I want this to be successful. Those are great comments that we need to have. If I'm looking at it from a perspective of you have a lending background, if there were changes to be made to make it work where you guys could come with more capital so we're not continuing to subsidize this, paying additional years for Dan to come and basically monitor this, is that feasible?
I guess I would defer to the attorneys that under the operating agreement, which you allow a lender to perfect a lien on your property. If the issue is we can get a loan, but if they want a collateral, whether it's the equipment or the building, are you going to allow a lien to be perfected?
Mayor, if I may, just for a moment.
Yes.
The RFP proposal that went out was only for an operator agreement. If there was some other type of arrangement that the body wanted to do, it's a totally different process that we would have to initiate to accomplish that.
We're not doing that.
We couldn't renegotiate this contract to do what you're proposing without doing a new process.
All right. Commissioner Warren.
Thank you, Mayor. I remember this very clearly because this was one of the first things that came before me when I became a commissioner 3 years ago, and the majority of my colleagues that are here now were there at that time, excluding Commissioner Ward. And during the conversations when we were talking about the budget, talking about putting out the RFP, we had not released the RFP. We knew then that there would be these additional costs. We knew then that there would be additional costs for construction. We knew then that there would be additional costs for the first year of the operation of the Sunset Lounge. So I'm not understanding why we're now saying that because an operator was chosen, that those costs roll over to their responsibility. That is not the conversation that we had. That is what we discussed, was how we would make this work and that it would continue to be supported by the city initially. So why are we now saying that that is contingent upon VITA when they were not a factor?
To that point, we have a budget. We adopted a budget for the operation of Sun. Whether we had those discussions or not, the reality of the situation is reflected in the budget that we've given the CRA for the operation of the Sunset Lounge. I don't recall those conversations that you're saying, but the budget is the best evidence as to what this body thought they were going to contribute to the operation of the Sunset Lounge. That's the budget. Now, if there's some concern or some discussion about increasing the budget, perhaps that's another conversation for another day, but the best evidence as to what this body wanted to contribute to the operation of Sunset Lounge is in the budget that was adopted for the CRA. Commissioner Fox.
Thank you. I want to get past I think the idea of the kitchen, whether or not we need to renovate it, no matter who the operator would be. I want to talk a little bit more about the KPIs if we can, since we only have a few minutes left. I know we're talking about, whether or not we can move forward, get something done in a couple weeks. I remember in the selection meeting asking Chris how are we going to determine, whether or not whoever is selected is going to be hitting the mark and benchmarks and things. And I remember him talking about the KPIs at that point. And so to me, I guess I'm wondering if the VITA team could explain a little bit about, I think you mentioned that there were 6 out of our 9 KPIs that would not be acceptable to you. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that more in depth while we have a few minutes, because I'm looking at, what the RFP said and, presenting a 5-year pro forma operation was one of the specifics in that, and that's the only one I've heard you mention, so I don't know if there's others that you could just talk about the issues.
Thanks for putting the list up. So we were in agreement, and I think the definition and the methodology for the first 3 were well stated. So we had no issues on gross revenues, net income, and entertainment and events. I think in gross revenues, Dan and I have always gone back and forth as to whether or not it should be net food revenues, but it says gross, but that's minor. The issue of customer service is, well, the restaurant's not projected to open until January, and the question is, should that be a year 1 KPI or should it be year 2? Local partnerships, community benefits, local suppliers, again, the thought was we'll comply. Our recommendation that if it is to be a year 1 KPI, then it needs to tell us what the weight is, so it'll measure up to 100%. And then what the criteria of measurement might be so that we know what the performance is. Sustainability, we thought that, well, if the building wasn't designed to be economically efficient, then what more can VITA do if you didn't design the building to have, the standards of economic sustainability. So that the question was, is it a one-time measurement? Is it related to what your expectation is for the equipment efficiency? Sales activity, prospecting, we thought that would be measured by entertainment and events, so we thought that was redundant. And then there was no calculation for the total score and performance. So what Vita did and what we did, we provided a scorecard. And the scorecard, if effectively weighted and rated, would calculate a score. That was not provided. We provided an Excel worksheet, again, in good faith. Mayor asked me, have we operated in good faith? I think in the dialogue between Dan and I, it was a lot of good faith and a lot of back and forth. And so as added value to the list, we even provided a scorecard. So we're not opposed to accountability. What do you expect for the first year that you want us to focus on to ensure that you are no longer subsidizing this facility? In our opinion, it's the first 4 for year 1, year 2. Not to say that the others aren't important, but if we don't address the kitchen and having an upstairs, what's beneficial for your nonprofits to use for fundraising events and others, then we're going to fail to deliver the facility that you want. And that's all our issue was, what's important for year 1, because the agreement says you will approve KPIs in each year along with the operating budget.
Did you have a follow-up, Commissioner? Okay, so we're going to cut off questioning for now. We will convene as a city commission at 5, and then we will reconvene as a CRA 5 minutes after the adjournment of the city commission meeting. So this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.